After a long history of conflict, Wales came fully under English rule in 1238. In the centuries following this, discontent grew in Wales, eventually resulting in an uprising led by Owain Glyndŵr, the last true Prince of Wales, in 1400. The rebellion lasted 15 years, during which time Welsh forces reclaimed large amounts of Welsh land. However, it eventually proved unsuccessful, and when Glyndŵr's death was recorded in 1415, the rebellion died with him. By 1542, the Laws in Wales Acts had annexed Wales to England, and by 1746, the Wales and Berwick Act had made it so that Wales, by law, was now part of England. The Welsh language was also under attack, targeted in 1847 by a series of publications that came to be known as the Blue Books. The books alleged that Welsh people were stupid and promiscuous, and that the language was somehow feeding into this. In schools, Welsh children were made to wear the Welsh knot if caught speaking Welsh. The knot was a block of wood hung around the neck of the child, and the child wearing it at the end of the day would be beaten by the teacher. The first steps towards a devolved Wales occurred in 1907 with the establishment of the Welsh Board for Education, and in 1920 with the disestablishment of the Anglican Church in Wales. In the 1940s and 50s, devolution became more relevant again. In 1948, a Council for Wales and Monmouthshire was created, and by 1964, the UK government included the position of Minister of State for Wales and Secretary of State for Wales. In 1967, the Welsh Language Act repealed the part of the Wales and Berwick Act that had included Wales in the legal definition of England, and allowed the Welsh language to be used in some legal settings. Despite these positive changes, there were several injustices against Wales during this time. In 1965, the Tryweryn Valley in Wales was flooded in order to create a reservoir to provide water for Liverpool. This was done without the consent of the local Welsh authorities or Welsh members of Parliament, and the residents of the valley were forced to evacuate the area, many of them from the centuries-old village of Capel Celyn, one of the last Welsh-only speaking communities in the country at the time. The event is often referred to with the phrase Cofwch Tryweryn, which means remember Tryweryn, and has become a slogan in Welsh nationalism. In 1966, a colliery spoil tip collapsed above the mining town of Aberfan, engulfing the primary school and a row of houses, killing 116 children and 28 adults. The event, which is now referred to as the Aberfan disaster, was found to be the fault of the National Coal Board, but the organisation was never prosecuted or fined. Residents of the town were forced to engage in lengthy legal battles just to have the remaining spoil tips removed from above the town, and families of victims were often denied compensation for the tragedy. Two Welsh nationalist terrorist groups were created in response to these events. Mudiad am Ddyfyn Cymru, or MAC, and the Free Wales Army were paramilitary groups connected to bombings during this time, mostly of infrastructure carrying water to Liverpool in protest of the flooding of Tryweryn. The bombings were largely acknowledged to be the doing of MAC, with the Free Wales Army largely falsely taking credit. However, the army was still key to supporting the rights of Welsh people, often advocating for families of the victims of the Aberfan disaster. In 1979, a referendum for Welsh devolution was held for the first time, but was voted down by a majority of 4-1. That year, another Welsh nationalist terrorist group formed, Meibion Glyndŵr, who burned down English people's holiday homes in Wales in protest of a Welsh housing crisis that exists to this day. English people buying holiday homes in Wales drives up house prices in the area, making it impossible for local Welsh people to afford to live in their own area. Meibion Glyndŵr have not officially been active since an arrest made in 1993 in connection with firebombs planted by the group in Conservative Party offices in London. In the same year, the Welsh Language Act finally repealed the Laws in Wales Act that dated back all the way to the 16th century, putting Welsh on equal footing with English in most aspects of public life. Support for devolution had continued to grow, despite the failure of the 1979 referendum, and in 1997, Labour made manifesto commitments to hold referendums on the matter for both Wales and Scotland. In September 1997, a referendum on Welsh devolution was held and passed with 50.3% for a devolved Wales. In 1998, the Government of Wales Act was passed, and on the 12th of May 1999, the National Assembly for Wales met for the first time.